This is your job, my friend. everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started. So if there, let's see if there are a couple seats here. If someone wants to come up to the front, a seat here. And Keith, could you help make sure that it's showing the right thing on the screen? Yeah, he's coming around.
So if you escape out of it, you just have to go back and do it right here. Go back into slideshow mode.
So it's in slideshow mode now? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Good afternoon, everyone. How are you? Personally, I'm still recovering from that keynote presentation. Oh my God, wasn't that amazing? I mean, it just took me to a whole different level. And here I am doing arts advocacy, and after that presentation, I realized there's so much more that we have to do. There's just so much more. And the issues are so much bigger. I am very grateful to Americans for the Arts, who I work for, to presenting someone like that. And I can see from your faces and your applause for Brian Stevenson that you all agree. What we're going to do is kind of hone in a little bit more specifically on some issues that we're working with in this political climate of how the arts and politics are doing in this Trump era. Every day is a new day. I have to look at my phone every half hour to see what's been tweeted, who's been indicted. So it's fast-paced. We need to stay connected as a network so that we stay informed with clearly breaking news happening on a regular basis. And to help us kind of walk through what we're working with at the federal level and at the state level and at the local level, we have a great panel of speakers with us today. We're going to, and I'm going to introduce them now and then, each one, and they'll be in the order that we'll be speaking. And the format is we're going to have each one speak for about 15 minutes, and then when we're done with all the speaking, we will have about 15 minutes for some Q&A. So as you think of questions when each speaker is talking, just jot down a note so you don't forget it, and we'll definitely take those questions at the end. The other thing that I want to say is that this PowerPoint, and actually there's an extended version of the PowerPoint when it comes to the section that I wrote, is already up on the Arts Action Fund website. It's the first blog post, so at artsactionfund.org. When you go to the front page blog, you will see this entire PowerPoint there. So even if you don't capture everything that's on every slide, it's going to be all there available to you. So we are going to start off with David Reid, the gentleman to my right. He is the policy advisor for the phenomenal law firm of Brownstein, Hyatt, Farber, and Schreck, which is headquartered in Colorado, but is the second largest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. And he is the counselor for Americans for the Arts on our lobbying activities. And that kicked in just days before Arts Advocacy Day this year, because we knew that we needed real strong reinforcements to open up a network of contacts to Congress to help us literally save the NEA. He has been phenomenal to work with, and one of the entrees that got us there is one of our board members, Steve Speece, who used to be the longtime chairman of Americans for the Arts, but also sits not only on the board of Americans for the Arts, but also on the board of the Arts Action Fund. And he is the COO of that law firm, and when the shit hit the fan, he said, "You guys need help." And it didn't take long, in just a few weeks, that we were able to set up a formal pro bono arrangement for the second largest lobbying firm in Washington, D.C., to represent all of us. And David's going to give us an overall environment, what's going on in D.C., what our Capitol Hill engagement plan is. And then I will give thank you. And then I will give a few more, I'll go after that and give a little bit more detail about what our grassroots strategy is to complement that Capitol Hill strategy with the Arts Action Fund. And then after that, Sofia Klatzker, who is the Executive Director of Arts for LA and also on the board of California Arts Advocates, will give us a state and local perspective of working with advocating for the arts in this particular climate. And then finally, we have Kevin Jones, who will be giving us a media perspective. He is the producer for KQED, which is an NPR affiliate here in the Bay Area, who's done an enormous amount of arts coverage of how what artists are doing and what are some lessons learned from that, which I think are important. So I'd like to start with David. If you could come up and start us off with that coverage. And the one thing I will tell you as he gets settled is to not forget to move this along like I just did. One of the handouts at your table is this federal advocacy update. And if for some reason you didn't get one because you're standing in the back, you can get copies at the Arts Action Fund booth out in front of the ballroom. Or Amaya, if you could stand up. Why don't you go ahead and stand up so everyone can see you. She's the Arts Action Fund manager, and she may also have some copies here with her. And I'll go over some of those highlights in a little bit, but I'd like to go ahead and ask David
Great.
to get started.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great pleasure working with you guys, and it's been a lot of fun and a learning experience for all of us. This is a very different environment than I think any of us had expected to be in. So with that, we'll go ahead and just get started. What I'll do is I'll give a broad overview of what's going on in Washington, and then sort of talk about our overall engagement and what that looks like, and then sort of what we're doing going forward into the summer and fall. So right now, I think the big thing that's on everybody's mind, especially in the arts advocacy world, is the budget and the prospect for the complete defunding of the NEA, the NEH, and a number of other arts programs. And I just want to start off with the president's proposal, and that's exactly what it is. It's a proposal, and it's his ideas. And as you can see here, and this is a lot of words, you can probably take a look at this online. I won't go through all of it. But the proposal by the president is dead on arrival in Congress. It slashes funding left and right in programs that are bipartisan and have been historically supported across parties and across regions. So with that in mind, we now have to look at the budget process that's happening on the Hill, and we're following that very closely. We're not likely going to get a budget for another few months, despite what's being said by the pundits on TV. And the budget proposals that we're looking at that are coming out, and some of the intelligence that we're getting from our sources on the Hill, say that Congress sees themselves as the adults in the room, and they are going to ensure that these types of proposals, I know it's kind of hard to believe, right? But looking at the administration, that's kind of how they see themselves and positioning themselves, and they themselves ultimately also have to answer to their constituencies. So looking at that and the conversations that we've had, and I'll touch on those in a minute, we've been encouraged by the work that they are doing to ensure that a lot of the priorities that we hold dear are ones that they are thinking about on a regular basis as they come through and go through that budget-making process. Also along with this is the debt limit. The debt limit needs to be increased. Mulvaney and Mnuchin have both said that it needs to be raised soon. Mulvaney has recently said that it can actually be raised as late as September, whereas Mnuchin would like to see it raised earlier. And there are a number of political reasons behind that, but that's another thing that needs to be part of the calculus and part of the mix as we're looking at what's happening on the Hill and overall at 1600 Pennsylvania. And these next few slides are just a few of the other priorities that the administration is trying to push and that the Hill is having to deal with in the overall context of what's happening and the priorities that we're trying to push. Healthcare obviously is a big priority that the administration would like to see done, and it's now in the Senate's hands, and they would also like to see it be done. In order for them to move forward with some of the other priorities like tax reform and infrastructure, they actually need to have a vote on the American Health Care Act. However, that's looking less and less like it's going to happen prior to the July 4th recess, and likely will not get done until after the August recess. The reason for that is because there is a lot of disagreement on how it is that they're going to come to, or how it is that they're going to bridge the partisan divide within their own party, with the Freedom Caucus, who's looking for more cuts, and the more moderates that are looking for a more generous package that saves things like Medicaid and Medicare. And again, there are other things that are being debated on the repeal of Obamacare, tax subsidies, et cetera. So that's, again, something that's a logjam in an environment that has fewer than 30 days of legislative days left before that August recess. Again, looking at tax reform, that's also a big priority. They can't get to that until they handle health care. And a lot of the things that they're trying to propose are also dead on arrival. One of the things you probably heard about is the border adjustment tax. That is pretty much dead at this point due to the fact that there are a number of special interests that have pushed back against it successfully. And it's also fairly unpopular amongst a broad swath of Republicans and Democrats. So they're trying to figure out a way to actually pay for the cuts that they're proposing. And they've had a lot of problems trying to figure out where that is. And at this point, there isn't anything politically that can be passed. But again, looking at the timeline, healthcare has to be taken care of before tax. Education, also something that is a priority. Again, something that will also have to be put on the back burner until these other priorities are taken care of. So with that wonderful background and very, very heartening sort of timeline that we're dealing with, let's look at the Capitol Hill engagement that we are doing, both with Brownstein and partnering with the Americans for the Arts, and you all too. And a lot of it is dealing with the Hill and working with Senate and House leadership. Key members of the House and Senate Appropriations Committees, specifically the chairman and the ranking members in both parties, and members of the House and Senate Appropriations subcommittees on the Interior. And those subcommittees are actually the subcommittees that oversee the funding of the National Endowment for the Arts, Humanities, et cetera. So that is very much where we are focusing our outreach efforts. And we've had nearly 30 meetings with members of that subcommittee and continue to follow up. And most of that engagement is on the Republican side due to the fact that those are the ones that we really need to get to. Those that are not naturally going to beat the drum for arts funding. And then, of course, the natural supporters of the arts. So people who have been supporters of the NEA, those who are on the Congressional Arts Caucus, those who have penned and co-signed letters to the administration as well as to the chairs of the broad appropriations committees to ensure that funding for the National Endowment for the Arts and National Endowment for the Humanities maintains at least at level, if not plussed up to the $155 million that we're looking to be funded in 2018. And the messaging, again, looking at this as a Republican-focused messaging, it's a little different than what we would normally do when we'd be in an environment with a Democratic administration and democratically controlled House and Senate. And the one thing that really does resonate with these offices is focusing on the presence of the NEA-funded programs in their district or in their states, and really putting out there the efficacy as well as the real impact that it's having on their communities, and looking at the economic impact of the nonprofit arts industry as a whole. Oftentimes you go into these offices and they don't really fully grasp what it is that NEA funding has done for their communities. And when you go in there with these infographics that really do literally spot where these organizations' funds are going And then also looking at highlighting individuals who have received these funds, and those folks being able to come in and tell the stories as to why it was that this kind of funding made it possible for them to be able to be successful in their communities and be productive folks to be able to contribute to both the jobs market as well as to their economy. And then also just looking at the multiplier effect of NEA grants, you know, and these are things that can be done both through these graphics that we share with these offices, both in person as well as parts of our follow-up. But again, just showing them that it's not just, you know, public funding going to the left coast and and to the east coast, but rather it's spreading money across the country and having an impact in every congressional district, as you all know. And that's, again, not something that a lot of these legislators have heard before, and something that we're continuing to hit home for them. And then also on the messaging, you know, these offices oftentimes are very attuned to issues affecting the military and veterans. And one big program that they really do enjoy seeing is the success of the Arts Healing Program. You know, there was the pilot program at Walter Reed in Washington, D.C. that is now spread to 12 hospitals and counting. That really has had a positive impact on folks coming back from overseas who suffer from PTSD, and then also their families as well, being able to deal with the issues that are unique to the military community. And beyond just the arts healing, but just the various arts programs that are specifically designed to help military and veterans, providing free passes to museums, free passes to theaters for, you know, kids of, you know, people in the military and the armed services. And being able to highlight that is extremely important, and being able to show them and show these legislators and show their staff the impact of these programs that are being funded really does help to hit a tone. And key messengers for this, I mean, the best messenger is somebody that's a voter. So if you are a constituent of this particular person, you coming in and telling your story is going to be the most impactful. And you telling them, had it not been for that arts, you know, program that was in my small town in Kansas that allowed me to, you know, really take advantage of what I thought was going to be my new future as a dancer. Had I not had that, I would have never really focused in school, and I never would have gone to college. Those types of stories are ones that they love to hear from. And those types of stories are everywhere. It's just a matter of identifying those people and bringing them to the offices, which is what we're helping to do and hoping, you know, to do more of. You know, along with that are beneficiaries of these programs. You know, I know that we had several celebrities come up with us during the first Arts Advocacy Day that I participated in. Stokes Mitchell actually was one who had a very compelling story about what it was that allowed him to really realize his potential, and it was an NEA-funded program. So that really was a great story that we were able to tell to Paul Ryan's staff, something that they were able to take back to their boss and was something that stuck. And each and every one of these offices that we visited, we've had the ability to really touch on one of these types of stories, whether it be from somebody that's actually a voter of theirs or somebody that, you know, can just really stitch a good story and talk about why this is important. Arts advocates, so folks like yourselves, coming in and talking about the work that you do and giving folks just that human touch and that human example of the, you know, what it is that the NEA is funding, and going from the grants that are given to the local and state arts agencies, and then those re-grants that are going out to these folks, you know, communities. That really, again, it helps for them to see that and have somebody to be able to go back and forth with and establish a relationship with on these things, rather than it just be a line item in an appropriations bill. And then, of course, other stakeholders. So a lot of the work that we're doing is building champions. We, going into this engagement, knew who our champions were. Obviously, it was very much heavily leaning on the Democratic side, but we found through our engagement that there are a number of Republicans who some already were and were great advocates of ours, but some who we didn't realize were, you know, had a personal story that or a personal, you know, bit of their background in the arts that made them, you know, ripe to foster a relationship with, and also help us to get our message to those who really are important in making sure that these sorts of funds are maintained. And this is just an outline of our ongoing relationship building. I came in working with them to help to build out that engagement strategy for the March Arts Advocacy Day. And we've done a number of similar days, obviously not as broad and not with nearly as many people, but with staff from Americans for the Arts and as well as a few others that we've been able to bring into DC for these meetings. And we found that they've been extremely productive in, again, one, identifying folks who are, are advocates and become advocates that we wouldn't necessarily have thought of as we're targeting those various subcommittees, as well as just continuing that engagement and following up and establishing those relationships. This particular environment really has created some strange bedfellows, and we found that to be the case on the Hill as well. Unlikely advocates for us that we can then tap to talk to their colleagues and work within their subcommittees and talk to their chairs and pen letters and letters of support. And then, of course, we're going to be doing another one similar to the ones we've done in April and May and July to highlight the economic impact study, which I think will really be a huge home run for the offices that we're talking to. And as part of our broad campaign, will be a nice way to cap off the summer prior to them going out to their districts in August. And it's literally the day before they head out that we'll be doing that. So it's going to be a nice way for us to touch them. And then again, in August, we'll be doing a staff briefing where we're going to be highlighting the economic impact study. And again, that's going to be working with the staff in these offices to ensure that they're aware of the broad economic impact in the districts of their bosses, as well as the states if they're Senate staff, and allow them to have that information and also to continue that conversation and to keep it top of mind. And throughout all of this, there is continued back and forth and ongoing engagement. I don't know if there are a few of you that were on the Hill for Arts Advocacy Day, but a lot of the work that is done, yes, is in the setting up of the meetings, but also continuing that back and forth and being a resource to these staffers and to these members' offices. So with that, I will hand it off.
Thank you. So I'm going to go over some of the grassroots work that we have done, are doing, and will be doing to complement the Hill strategy of direct contact with members of Congress. I just would like to say that going into meetings like the Office of Paul Ryan is just not possible without someone like David. So I want to personally thank you for things like that, because there are a lot of other offices like that of the leadership where we just didn't have access to previously that we now do. So this lifts all of our boats. And some of the work that we do at the Arts Action Fund is of significance too. It was created in 2004. You can see some of the goals that we set out there is to promote public policies that provide individuals and families affordable access to all forms of the arts, rally grassroots support against attacks to the arts, and build political influence to ensure bipartisan support for the arts. Another way I call that is back in 2004, we set out to create a pro-arts majority. This was coming off the heels of Contract with America, where there was a real serious threat of closing out the NEA, 2 years cutting it in half, and by the third year it was to be zeroed out. And through grassroots support, direct lobbying, we were able to do it, but it was really close, really, really close. And that's why Americans for the Arts decided we needed to create a political organization like Arts Action Fund to create more of a pro-arts majority, regardless if they're Republicans or Democrats. What I'm really pleased to kind of observe and share with you today is that what we set out in 2004 is what is allowing us to enjoy and have as a huge firewall between what the White House administration is proposing and a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate saying no to the president. Okay, we did not have that in 2004. And we have it today because of all of these efforts over the past decade and a half of really reaching out, all of you helping to reach out to a lot of your Republican members of Congress to say this is not a Republican issue, this is not a Democratic issue. This is a bipartisan issue because it helps our communities. These are grants that are going to every single congressional district in the country. And a lot of changes happened at the NEA as a result of that close call that happened in the early 2000s. So some of the things that we did to create that bipartisan effort. We have our National Arts Vote campaign that happens every 2 years. We're always, especially in those presidential election years, we always make sure that we go to the Republican conference. This year it was in Cleveland, had a huge event at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is down there on the below photo, and then had another huge event at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for the Democratic Convention. We engage a lot of the presidential candidates and elected officials at the federal, state, and local level to be part of that panel. And the host of the one at the Republican one was Mike Huckabee. Now, I know a lot of people don't necessarily agree with Mike Huckabee's points of view on a lot of different issues. But the one issue that we might find clarity in terms of an overlap is his perspective on public money to support not only arts and music education, but it's evolved to further support the National Endowment for the Arts, to the point that the work that we started cultivating in Cleveland in July of last year got us to the point that in March of 2017, this year, he wrote an op-ed that we asked him to do and kind of gave him some talking points about, but he wrote it himself, that got placed in the Washington Post that essentially said, this is why conservatives should support public funding for the arts. That you can also find on our website. And then while we were on the campaigns trail in 2016, we asked all of the presidential candidates what their perspectives were on the arts. It was hard to get now President Trump's, but then candidate Trump's position. But we again worked this time with the Washington Post in a different way. Donald Trump had an editorial board interview with the Washington Post, and they reached out to us to specifically put together some questions on arts policy that they would consider asking Donald Trump at that time. Lo and behold, they actually asked almost all the questions that we had asked. This is the most important one, and it's worth reading. So the question is, do you think that, or does the federal government have a role to play in funding the creation and performance of art, or in making art accessible to all Americans? And his answer at that time, and again, this is before he's elected, this is even before he won the Republican nomination. His answer was, the Congress, as representatives of the people, make the determination as to what the spending priorities ought to be. Critical thinking skills and the ability to read, write, and do basic math are still the keys to economic success. A holistic education that includes literature and the arts is just as critical to creating good citizens. Now, we hope to keep him to his statement to let Congress decide, because it's Congress that's going to get us out of this problem. So anytime we can remind him, let's use those words back to President Trump, saying, hey, you said Congress should decide, and that's exactly what we want to do, is have Congress decide on this decision, on what the funding for the NEA and these other cultural agencies should be. Now, one of the other handouts that you received, that's color, either some are in orange and some of them are this light yellow, is the funding chart. And many of you are members of the Arts Action Fund, so you've received this in action alerts, but just in case, it's here in the PowerPoint, and it's also up on the blog post of the artsactionfund.org. So the President's proposal for all these various different federal cultural agencies and museums are on the far right column. And what he has proposed is a small amount of money going to these, to the NEA and NEH for the specific purpose of closing it out in an orderly way in 2018. So, I should say in fiscal year 2018. And what's important to remember about how the fiscal years work in Congress is that we are currently in FY 2017, but that began on October 1st of 2016. And the FY 2017 budget concludes on September 30th of this year. So he is proposing that beginning October 1 of this year, that the NEA and the NEH and some of these other agencies that you see zeros next to, including Corporation for Public Broadcasting and some Office of Museum and Library Services, that they all get zeroed out and that they should start working on just limiting. So there's no, in his budget, there's no money in there for grant making. But as David pointed out, Congress and very important top Republican leaders have given us information to say there's no way this is going to happen. But the issue is really about timing, because they have notoriously been running late on getting these budgets approved. So there is really an issue, almost a crisis, of what will happen when that new fiscal year begins in October of this year. Will Congress be able to what will be an omnibus bill again, but when will they do it? This year, for the current fiscal year, they didn't even pass it until April, is that right? April. Okay, that's more than 7 months into the year. I mean, it's just creating chaos within these federal agencies of how to run their agency. They hold back announcing grants until that budget was released. It's something that they would have done months earlier. So it will even create more chaos starting in the fall. So there's definitely a push, because it's not just happening to federal cultural agencies. Every sector, except the defense industry, is impacted by these kind of irrational cuts or eliminations of full-out agencies. So the entire kind of swamp in Washington is interested in making sure that a budget is passed sooner than later, whatever level it's at, but sooner than later, because of the chaos that will start happening in the fall. So in terms of some of the things that we have done to reach out, I know many of you have probably signed on to our online petitions. We got at least 67,000. We have another one going on now if you're interested. This was before the budget had come out, and now it's an even more stronger position. And I will say that another example of why we can kind of rely on this Congress to help us out, President Trump had actually asked to rescind an additional $15 million retroactively in the current budget we're in now for the NEA and NEH. And what Congress did instead is said, no thanks, we're actually going to give them a $2 million increase. So that's another good indication. But what's out there as a looming issue is how much of a budget allocation they are going to get. And are we going to get into a situation where they don't want to cut these agencies because they don't think they're meritorious? They're going to have to cut them because there's no money. So there is that budget looming issue that David talked about at the top of his presentation of what kind of situation will that be. Many people believe that they're just going to find a way to make it the same level as the previous year. We've also done quite a bit of social media. If you stop by the Arts Action Fund booth that Amalia's at, we have these great looking decals that are you can take on and off as you please for the hashtag Save the NEA. This has helped generate an enormous amount of good activity in getting letters to Congress and getting new members to the Arts Action Fund. We think we need at least 1 million members to have the political clout to move issues in an even more effective way. We're at 350,000. But if we can get more people using that hashtag Save the NEA, we can get a lot more members. At a previous meeting, I had announced to folks that our goal for this year was before we had written the goals for our budget out in the summer of last year before the election. We said, okay, we want to get at least 50,000 new members in 2017, the year we're in. We actually got 100,000 new members in the first 3 months. because of the crisis that's going on. And I want to thank people like Sofia with Arts for LA that has a partnership with the Arts Action Fund that makes her thousands of members automatic members of the Arts Action Fund. Something that is an absolute model for all of you also who have a strong membership base if you want to partner with the Arts Action Fund in getting your members to receive these action alerts immediately for them to take action. One of the other things that I think was a smart thing that we did this year was when the Congress changed and different members came on the various key appropriation committees, we actually started taking out Facebook ads that look like the ones you're seeing here in those congressional districts of those GOP members who would be new to the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee that has oversight of the NEA funding and budget. So what we were doing was taking out Facebook ads to say, please join as an Arts Action Fund member, because there are places in rural parts of the country where we had literally very small representation. And so this alone in targeted rural areas helped us get thousands of new members who would be effective constituents, as David was pointing out, in terms of who is the most important member or messenger to talk about things. It's the voting constituent of the member. So if we don't have people to go out and take those messages to the member, we would be in a lost position. So we got out ahead of the position and started recruiting new members in those areas before we needed them. And then Bob, in the keynote presentation that I know that all of you were at, talked about our ad campaign that we're doing in these key congressional districts, so I won't go into detail there, and all of the op-eds that we're placing. Again, this is very targeted. You may not have seen it in your newspaper, but maybe that's because you're not in an area that's represented by a GOP member who sits on the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee. But all of these op-eds are, and they're getting placed to really highlight what was, again, David's main point in terms of what are members seeing as the biggest point that they need to hear, and that is that these NEA grants are going in his or her congressional district. And so that is the point of these op-eds. They're not just generic, the arts are great. They're specific about how NEA grants are impacting our particular community, which happens to be that congressional district. And then I said to myself, if I had enough time, I would go over some of these key points that I've developed. And I do have about 4 or 5 minutes to do this. What you're seeing here is a list of the most common negative points that are made about the NEA and how we have been responding to it. The list is actually 3 times longer than what I'm going to present. These are just the highlight ones. The web version of this PowerPoint has the full list. So it's another reason for you to download that off of our website. So if you can believe it, we're starting off with a constitutional argument. There are still constitutionalist federalists who believe that if it's not written into the Constitution, then it shouldn't be funded. So here's a nice citation, Title I, Section 8 of the Constitution, Clause 8, that specifically says that Congress shall promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. We obviously know that that's more about copyright, but it does talk about the importance of the federal government having a role in allowing artists to make a living and protecting what their copyright is. And as an FYI, half the things that the federal government funds is not cited in the Constitution, including highways. Second, there's still a myth out there that bureaucrats, meaning government employees, should not decide what is art. And we say, you're right, they shouldn't. And that's why Congress made it so that only citizens who are not government employees are the ones who can make those grant-making decisions at the NEA and the NEH. In addition to those citizens, and a lot of them are experts in their field, ballet or musical theater or whatever it is, but they're citizens, they're not government employees, And in addition to that, they add a layperson to every single grant jurying system at the NEA. There is a layperson put in there, and that's to kind of take in considerations of decency. That was their way of addressing the Jesse Helm days of what was and was not pornography or indecent. So these are rules that Congress set up as systems and process to put into place to make sure that NEA grants are funded in a way that did not offend people. And so half our time is just making sure that they know about those things. The congressional staff that come through congressional offices are so young, they don't have the history of knowing what happened before them. So a lot of times it's just kind of giving them that education of what previously has happened and what the rules are today. Another one is the NEA funding is really a subsidy for the elite rich. Paul Ryan himself is quoted as saying, "Arts is generally enjoyed by people of higher income levels, making them a wealth transfer from poorer to wealthier citizens," actually. So that's a direct quote. And so here are some statistics from the NEA on their grant making over the years. A significant percentage of NEA grants go to those with fewer opportunities to experience the arts. It's to promote access to the arts. So 40% of NEA supported activities actually take place in high poverty neighborhoods. 36% of NEA grants go to organizations that reach underserved populations, such as people with disabilities, people in institutions, and veterans. 33% of NEA grants serve low-income audiences, a lot of free programs as well. And as David had mentioned in his thing, and the NEA has developed a really important, highly effective, and it's getting a lot of attention, program in reaching out to military personnel and their families and engaging them in the arts, especially those who have come back from war situations with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injuries. This has really gotten a lot of attention on Capitol Hill. Another argument is that we need to eliminate the NEA in order to reduce the size of the federal government and its budget and to reduce the deficit. This is absolutely a false argument. It's a false savings. We know that the funding that goes to the NEA is 4/1000th of 1%. It would absolutely have no impact whatsoever on the deficit. And I would actually advocate, and you'll see in tomorrow morning's presentation, that the amount of money that the nonprofit arts organizations create as an economic impact is tenfold greater in terms of the funds that go back into the federal, state, and local government coffers as a result of payroll taxes and other kinds of taxes that are generated that help the government. So we can't afford to cut it. Finally, the private sector can make up the difference with corporate and foundation grants. I actually interviewed quite a few corporations and foundations because I wanted to hear from them what their perspective was on that answer. And here is a summation of what they said. Corporations and foundations do not have the same mission as the NEA to provide arts and cultural opportunities to every American adult and child. Their philanthropic support is often geographically constricted to a city, region, or state. The few national arts funders that exist provide support primarily in large urban areas. Rural communities are, for the most part, unable to access corporate and foundation dollars, and they are also disadvantaged by the relative lack of individual donors in their community for these kinds of projects. That's from the horse's mouth. So, and this is a very common argument that we hear on Capitol Hill. So I give these to you, and you'll have at least 10 more when you download the website. So thank you for your attention on this issue, but we also want to look at what's happening at the local level and the state level, and I can think of no one better than Sofia Klatzker to present that.
Thanks. So, I am really delighted to be here first, and really with the level of thinking on this panel and over 150 people in the room. I will say first, I am not the expert on this. I get to be on this panel. I get to share with what we're doing in Los Angeles. Hopefully there's some stuff that you can glean. I'm hoping to also learn from you. So this is work that I think we all do together. And I'm really delighted to be here. I'm the executive director of Arts for LA. We're a local arts advocacy organization. I'm going to breathe heavily because of the diaphragm right now. And it's mic'd so closely that you get to hear it. I'm so sorry. What this means as a local agency is that we're the voice for the arts for Los Angeles County, that we fight for access for arts and culture for our residents. We fight for arts education for all of our students, increase funding for arts from public and private sources, and diverse voices represented at all levels. That's a quick nutshell. I would say if you don't know LA County, we are the population of Georgia in the size of Connecticut. So we serve over 10 million residents. That also means we have 81 different municipalities and 88 municipalities and 81 school districts. And so when I talk about this, we're really talking about a region with the unique challenges of geography, public access, funding, and elections. We're in a constant state of building relationships, especially with those who are seated elected officials and those who are running for office. And I have to say, after November, I am even more focused on getting everyone I know to run. And that's a lot of our agenda at this point, is that we are going to strengthen the advocacy muscle of everyone that we work with. And we're also going to encourage people, because all politics is local, and I have the pleasure of working at that level, to get more involved. And boy, if you have an arts background, even better. Otherwise, we're just going to keep briefing you and get you that arts background. I would say our big thing is fostering grassroots leadership to strengthen our coalition. And our network right now is about 55 to 60,000 people. That's the wide network. We have contributing members as well. But in terms of people who I can call on to take action, it's a very big number. And we try to share that as much as we can with our partners at Americans for the Arts. This panel, according to my phone's guide, the two questions that were at the top were, what to expect right now? So, you know, not the expected. And how to deploy the energy. I'm going to speak to both of those ideas, but especially what to expect right now. It's really important to say, let's do some timetables, and Nina touched on this. From now to September 30th, we're looking at the budget, and we're really trying to see if we're going to have a passed budget, if it's going to be a continuing resolution, what's that going to look like. From October to November 2018, we're looking at midterm elections. And then from that point to 2020, I'm looking at the presidential election. So in terms of the big steps of what am I getting prepared for, what are the talking points, who am I trying to rally, those are my big markers when I think about expectations, because those are the only things I can control. Let's see. Oh, am I doing this wrong? Do I point it at something?
Say it again?
The right arrow?
Yep.
Yeah.
Use the arrow on the keyboard, please. Down arrow.
Down arrow. Nope.
On the keyboard.
Nope. I'm just locking up. It's cool. I'll keep talking. Once we figure this out, you'll catch up. So I'm going to talk a little bit for context about where this work falls in Arts for LA, because I think it's going to help with the conversation and how we can continue talking later. All of our political and electoral work at Arts for LA runs under our Arts Vote umbrella. And actually, Jennifer Fukutomi-Jones is in the back there. She's my director of programs. There's actually only 4 of us at Arts for LA, and as of Monday, we'll have our 5th employee. And so that's exciting. But it also means that when we talk about this work, yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. That this is the oversight, and that nothing that we do alone. Everything we do in partnership and in coalition. This work that we're talking about is called our Arts Vote work. 2 years ago, this was Arts Day. It happened in April. We did it focused on the LA City Council. Last year, I had this brilliant idea that was going to turn into Arts Week, and then we did this whole week of activity. And then this year, I had this really stupid idea that I was going to make the whole month of April Arts Month in LA County. And we started that with a resolution from the county declaring it Arts Month. We went on to have our city council presentations. I'll talk about that in a second. The next week we were focusing on data and the datathon and how you can use the different data sets to have advocacy. Can I tell you, and this is how you know I'm wonky, that we did a datathon on the same day the science rally was downtown, as well as the book festival, the Festival of Books at USC. And we had over 100 people, excited people, diving into data sets to answer arts and culture questions. It was awesome. It was totally awesome. So that was week 2. Week 3, we actually, that was policy. Oh, because that was the city of LA, right, because they moved us, which is why we did make it Arts Month. So I'll talk about that in a second. And then the last week, we were all about youth voices, youth stories, youth advocacy, arts education. So that worked, and now we have to do it again. For every election, municipal or school board, we survey every single candidate. With 88 cities and 81 school districts, that means that at any given time, we're surveying close to 400 people who are running for these offices. We are briefing them, we are working with them. This next year, we're going to be working more with campaign managers so that we can have a continuous role and relationship with people as these new candidates are emerging. But the big idea is they answer the questions, and then when we have enough responses, we post them on our website. We ask everyone the same questions. We actually are working within the law of what we can display, but we really think it's important to make sure that they have to speak to it and that people who are voting know how they are voting on these things. Candidate forums, creating a space. We partner generally with the League of Women Voters to ask arts questions of all the candidates. This is one of my favorite little projects, I've got to say. My favorite program is Activate, which I'll talk about, but arts and polling places. This was the moment where we thought, why aren't nonprofits polling places? How do we change that relationship of transactional to community? And so we started working with the Registrar Recorder. You should all steal this, by the way. Steal this. We work with the Registrar Recorder to train our nonprofits how to enroll to be those spaces and then train staff to be poll workers, which are also usually, the county, at least in LA, is always looking for people to be poll workers. And then you can counter program with having live music that day or having poets who are writing poetry. So I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Briefings for all candidates. I'm happy to meet with anyone anytime, but we also do briefings specifically around elections. And then the youth vote work. We're really focused on registering students to vote, empowering students to be more active, and making sure that their voices are really being heard. Part of this work for me, and I don't actually like violent analogies, but Army seems really good in this moment. So how do we deploy this energy? I would say one way that we're doing this is through our 9-month program called a leadership development and advocacy strengthening program called Activate. We actually developed this, and I don't know if she's still in the room, but Denise Grandy from the LA County Arts Commission was a great partner in the development of this program. And we focus on aspirational advocacy because until this year, there was always some threat, but we were never as threatened as we feel right now. And so what we wanted was there to be this muscle of advocacy that you weren't waiting to be reactive, but that we were still moving agendas forward. So the 9-month program is around, where are my strengths? Who are the people in my circle that are influencers? How do I develop a strategy to have them help me move an agenda item forward? And my philosophy in general is there is no training without taking action. So Activate literally is, if you are a fellow of Activate, by the end of 9 months, you have to do an advocacy project. I have, as of this minute, 225 people have gone through this program. Excuse me. We're opening it up for the 4th year right now. By September, that number will be over 300 people. This room right now has about 150 people in it. So imagine double this, representing different cities, different school districts, who are really fired up and can now start to manage your communities locally. That's what we're aiming for. And I want all of them to run for office too. You know, it's a little thing, you know. Okay, this is a picture of Cornerstone when they became a polling place. I love this. It's a theater company. But they also then had a lot of activity around the election itself. For the first time, the neighbors walked in. And so we had two outcomes from this polling place initiative, that we were having a non-transactional relationship, and we were building relationships, comfort, and trust with the people surrounding our organizations, which has not always been the case for some of our nonprofits. And I think that when we talk about equity and we talk about change, then we actually have to be realistic about who are we talking about and who are we representing. So that's part of that work. Okay. This is part of our youth folk work. This on their t-shirts, it says, I vote, I matter. We partnered with United Way and the League of Women Voters on this. In 1 year, we registered 3,000 students to vote, and my staff registered students at one high school, and then the day of the election went to the high school and walked the students to the polls, which is how we got the photo, and was with them the whole way. Was that arts related? Not in a specific way, but who else is investing in kids that way? So we're building relationships. At the same time, we're making other opportunities available to them. I think of all this work as building the leadership capacity of the people around us. If you're going to talk about my issues, even better, but be civically engaged. Have your voice heard. Now, with the youth work, we have a secondary program where students are doing videos that are then sent to their school boards about the change that they seek in their own school systems. And I've got to say, that has been a very powerful program for us. Okay, so mobilizing, I'm almost done really. The local, for this month-long Arts Month, again, a little silly, we decided that we were going to not only show up in the chamber and have the city council declare it Arts Day in LA, but also set up council meetings with all 15 offices. So we trained 85 delegates a month in advance, which is a little different. Usually when you train delegates, it's usually the day before, an hour before, it's pulling together the talking points. But we decided we were going to build coalitions, and we had little captains for each of the groups. And unintentionally, we created these real coalitions who are still in touch with one another and still leading locally in these council districts. From one of those, these meetings were supposed to be 20 minutes. With one of the council members, they had a 2-hour meeting. The councilman wanted to show them all the artwork on the walls. We got a lot of pictures. And they had not reappointed an arts deputy. The following day, the email went out to the captain saying, based on the conversation, I just appointed one of my staff members to be an arts deputy, so you now have a point person, and we want to make sure that that relationship continues. So the building was really important. That was the local. Statewide, so this goes back to what Nina was just talking about. We have people in LA who are really interested, and everyone's frustrated and they want to do more. So we knew that as part of March, they were going to be going to DC for the Arts Day nationally. We knew that NEA was a big thing. We knew that they could sign up to the larger letter, but we also thought our representatives want to know how we're affected in California. And so from Californians for the Arts, we did our own letter to understand who was going to respond, and then we could separate those letters for the visits. And so we had over 6,000. This is 10% of the number who have filled out the national one. I mean, it's not insignificant. We actually sent all of these names also to AFTA. So we're trying to double down on how we can build that relationship. But these were then hand-delivered by the people who live in those districts to their elected officials, and then with the list of who in that district had already signed on. So not just a number, these are real people. There's so much more to say about that, but I think I'm going to leave it at that. Oh, you know what I'm going to say about state really fast? Yesterday night, the legislature moved the budget towards the governor. We look like we have a renewal, and actually the new head of Californians for the Arts is Victoria Hamilton. She's sitting right there. So we look like we may have a budget that will have a one-time to restoration to ongoing, but we don't know. And there's a lot that we're tracking at the state level too. The other thing that's been successful, and I think that this relationship is one that we point to, We are able to do more in California now because we have funding for a lobbyist, the same lobbyist that represents the Boeing company. And that gives us access in the halls that we never had before. So that's our Paul Ryan moment, but at the state level, right? Okay. And, oops, did I press the wrong thing? I might have. I really can't be trusted. I'm missing one, but that's okay. Okay, so pretend that there's a crowd on the screen, a large crowd, and at the top it says, "This is the moment of action." Okay, because what we're finding is that we've seen the rise in Los Angeles in this moment of action. We've seen a rise of ad hoc groups. We've seen a lot of artists coming together to counsel one another, to find community, and figure out what they can do now. What can we do as citizens? What does that look like? And volunteerism is up. We're seeing a lot of activity. We're seeing our donations coming up. And this term artivist has become very popular. And I think it's the artist plus activist, but there's another definition that was also, that I saw, which is, in these perilous times, the kind of escalated passion is emerging, a creative energy that comes from giving one's heart and soul and imagination to the struggle. Not aggression, but fierceness. Not hurting, but confronting. Not violating, but disrupting. This passion has all the ingredients of activism, but is charged with the wild creations of art. This was said by Eve Ensler. She did the Vagina monologues. And artivism is where edges are pushed, imagination is freed, and a new language emerges altogether. So we're seeing this message come up around civic engagement, reaching out to representatives, specific actions, and some examples here. This is the Go Vote campaign. This was a project of Culture Group, a collaboration of social change leaders and artists who believe that cultural change is essential to social change. This was launched in 2012. Every election, we relink to all these images, and it's a ton of artists have created these images. This was a campaign of postcards, 44 in total, resistance postcards out of an artist from Philadelphia who gathered that community to create postcards for people to send out. This was actually part of an artivist group in Los Angeles of creating a postcard specifically for the Attorney General of specific artwork around getting a special prosecutor. And we're seeing that activism come up. I would just say one more thing, which is, how many of you have ever sung publicly or just with other people? Okay, so here's the moment. We are the choir, right? We all believe the same thing. But we also know what it is to be the choir. And what that means is, it's not just one voice. And part of what we are all working at right now is, how do I keep active without burning out? How do I continue and find that momentum? And where does it come from? And if we go back to the choir analogy, it's that if the person next to you is singing, you can take a breath. And when they need a breath, you sing. And you all together know when you're supposed to stop and listen, and we all know together when we're supposed to get really loud. And I think that's how I've been approaching this work, is don't do it alone. Listen to the people next to you. Take the moments in front of you, and then take advantage of every avenue as it comes. That's it for me right now.
I want to make sure we get this back on. Okay. That was the image you were looking for earlier. Sophia, your image is back. Oh, yay. That was the one you were looking for. Okay, so I'd like to thank Sophia and now ask Kevin Jones to join us. Kevin is stepping in for, you might see in your program that it was going to be Musiker, who is a journalist also with the same NPR affiliate. And he was not able to join us at the last minute, but he sent us very, very competent replacement.
Hey, everybody. First off, I understand it's the first time in San Francisco for this conference. So anybody here to San Francisco for the first time? All righty, good to see you. Two things you should know. It's not San Fran, it's not Frisco, it's the city if you want to fit in, and we don't eat rice-a-roni, so I don't know why that was ever a thing.
Ben's here?
Yeah, somewhere. So anyways, wanted to talk, I guess, the whole thing is that, being a journalist, I'm not about advocacy, or at least I'm not supposed to be. I'm more about assessing and informing our public. So this is going to be more about how we cover things in Trump's world rather than making a difference. First off, first off, I came to KQED to be an arts journalist. Before then, I was at KTVU, and that's our local Fox affiliate, and that was, I might as well have been pulling a lever at the news factory. Murder, fire, that kind of stuff, And so when I went into arts journalism, I wanted to concentrate on arts journalism. I wanted to concentrate on the local punk bands or stand-up comedians, that kind of thing. But politics, it's inevitable. It's always going to affect arts. So a lot of the times when we would cover arts, it would mostly be about displaced artists, displaced businesses that are beloved. A big story would be like a record store closing just because of rental rates and that kind of thing. So that was usually what we got into. But when the Trump thing started coming in, when the horse race started up with the 2016, I was glad I did not have to jump on that. But it ended up being unavoidable, especially when I learned this former San Francisco artist, Ilma Gore, was being harassed because she's the one who painted the infamous Trump with a micropenis painting. Do you remember this? It was funny. She was very good at defending it, too. She's like, it's a normal body, There's nothing wrong. This is so totally normal. And it's like, well, he seemed to have a problem with it because she was banned from Facebook, banned from eBay. She was getting attacked on the street. But this was kind of our entrance into covering Trump and what was going on. And this was actually a big story. I should also point out that we're an NPR affiliate. We got to be worried about our audience. And so I blanked out his micropenis in that picture and couldn't stop from people posting it in the comments anyway. So it was kind of useless. I should have just left it be. So that continued on. We had other things going on. We're like, naked Trump time. Oh, this is hilarious. Yeah, look at it, he's everywhere, Still thinking that Hillary was going to win, let's just have fun with this. And then he won. And, oh man, it was that depression even hit our newsroom. It was like just long conversations just sitting between our cubicles. What is this going to mean? And especially, we're NPR affiliated, and we knew that they've been wanting to kill Big Bird for a long while. That's why Big Bird ran off to HBO. I mean, he was done with it. He knew it was coming. And so we were really worried about what was going to happen. So, we did like what most people do. We covered the upcoming marches and everything else. There's a lot of protests that broke out right away, and we were right there. But then we actually got to thinking, this is going to have a big impact on arts. We knew that, and so we wanted to do a project where we wrote a story about a, politics-related arts project every day for the first 100 days of Trump's presidency. And we put it out first to the public, submit your story ideas, and of course, we got 300 submissions, which is really good, but a lot of them were just self-promotion of, hey, I got a yoga studio and I hate Trump, Doesn't really work for us. Not as noticeable as you would think, but we try, but we did get a lot of great submissions, and we also did a lot of our own reporting. And so we started off with kind of weekly stories. We did a lot of songs. There was the 30 for 30 project, which I think went to 100 for 100. So this is, what's her name? This is Rocky Rivera. She wrote a song called Round We Go, but it was about the need to organize. And so we highlighted a lot of that. A lot of artivists, as we pointed out, were doing a lot of great things. And we try to cover as many as possible, especially if they were notable, you know? Like if you had a song that just said, you know, F you, Trump, we're not going to cover that. But if it was really saying something, or especially even just as topics as well, like if there were things about immigration or arts funding, anything like that, we would usually jump on it. Yeah, and so we covered a lot of art shows too. The artivists went crazy, and we had a lot of great kind of shows to cover, a lot of creative art going on. I just think that's a hilarious stamp. Mark Harris too, I think, got in some trouble later for some anti-police LEO art that he did, but you know, that's life. That's today. And we also made a lot of videos about these artists as well, which did really well for us. But you know, everyone had a story. We did a story about I think she was 14 years old, editorial cartoonist. So that was really great, and that did really well for us too. And it was really great too, because then that got the word out about her art, and she got some more shows from that. And we try to get as creative as possible. Like I thought I wanted to highlight this story because this was really interesting. A local arts advocacy group, actually no, they wouldn't be arts advocacy. They were straight up just political artivists. And they did a workshop about how makeup techniques, so that if you went to a protest, if you had a picture taken of you and it was posted on social media, the software, the facial recognition software that was being used by law enforcement wouldn't be able to pick up your face. So, you know, we were able to kind of really stretch it, and though we couldn't really advocate for for our beliefs, we could point out what was going on and kind of highlight these interesting and significant forms. Anyways, okay, and we also we had a few personal essays. We can't advocate, of course, but we are trying to get our opinions out there and really try to provide a representative voice for our community. In this case, this is Mark Bamoudi Joseph from the Yuba Buena Center for the Arts. He wrote a great piece about why he makes art, and not about reaching out, but you know, pushing himself and pushing others. And we're finding a lot of success with not explicitly advocating a side, but really trying to inspire people, writing essays that at least represent a viewpoint that people can understand and appreciate. We also did that after the Ghost Ship fire. Did you guys familiar with the Ghost Ship fire? We had a very successful essay, which was about how it could happen to any of us. You know, these warehouse spaces exist because of high rental rates, issues with real estate, and the fact that artists don't make a lot of money. I don't know if you know that. We also found a pro-Trump artist. We found two, actually. For 100 days, we were really searching, and we were able to find two. And we were really proud of that, because that was hard. And this guy, too, he's actually in Oakland. He's in the Bay Area, and he's very proud of what he does. He did paintings about, like, you know, these beautiful portraits of James O'Keefe and stuff. And the story actually did get around, but a lot of people just wanted to comment to tell him how much his art sucked, which was not the point of this. But then when you see it, you can kind of see the inspiration why. I mean, that is Pepe with a flaming Jesus and Trump. That is really his art. You can buy that right now if you would like. So yeah, a lot just comments just about like, man, this is horrible, but at least he's, you know, we got him. That's what really matters. So as we continue on, well, first off, the 100 Days project was a success. It really got our, you know, what we were trying to do out there, and it meant more content and more highlighting of what artists are doing in this time. You know, for 100 days, we actually did 116 stories. So, I mean, there was more than enough content that we were able to jump on, and we never stopped, and we really tried to highlight the biggest and best stories we could. And now we're just watching, now, you know, we're just back to covering usual artists, theater, art shows, music, stand-up comedians. But then, of course, too, like you, we're following the money. We want to know what's going on with the NEA. We got all those alerts ready to go. We've also been watching the state funding, too, which has been really exciting for the fact that what was seen initially as a one-time increase of $8 million, $6.8 million. Now it's up to, what, 15 million this year now? Or something like that. I think the most recent budget is much bigger for the California Arts Council. So, but I do want to point out one thing. I can't advocate, you know, like who should do what, but I do want to suggest something. You know, share things on your social media is so important now. It's sad people stop going to home pages, or at least they've really decreased. You know, your social media pages are really how people get news now. And so if you want to help kind of the world of the arts, not only push those stories about, you know, what's happening with funding, what's happening with Trump, you know, and what he tweeted today or whatever, but really share things about great art that's coming out now. You know, if you come across an art show that you really appreciate, or you just saw a play you really enjoyed and you read a review of it that you thought did a great job of explaining what it was like, share that. Because great art is still being made, and we still need to remind people that's what's going on. That's, you know, it pays my bills, of course, but at that same time, too, you know, creativity is an unstoppable force, and we should actually nurture it. And so not only nurture it with funding, but with support online. That's it. Thanks for your time.
So now we want to hear from you. What would you like to ask? Yes? Oh, okay, great. So on the both Americans for the Arts, well, let's focus more on the Americans for the Arts website. There are two things we can show. One is the list of members of the Congressional Arts Caucus and the Senate Cultural Caucus. And then if you go to the Arts Action Fund under the voting section, you can go to the Congressional Arts Report Card, where we give a thumbs up based on scoring of their voting records for both the House and the Senate. The latest one was for 2016, so some members, if they didn't get reelected, would still be in there, but it does show through that point. Members of the Interior Appropriations Committee, the report card would not, but if you want to get a list of the Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, I mean, you could find it eventually on our website. I think the best thing to do is Google House Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, Senate Interior Appropriations Subcommittee, and it'll give you the list. Yes?
Sure.
I have told our city council members in our city have joined our advocacy day at our state capitol. So many times you don't have an opportunity to really connect with your elected official. I'm speaking to young staff members, trying to get them engaged. How effective is that really? When you talk to someone who is really not connected to the issue, or really, I don't know if the message is being carried forward, what's your assessment on all of this?
Sure, and I think that goes to the follow-up and establishing that rapport and that relationship with that particular staff person, and also identifying within your network who also has a contact and an into that particular office for that particular public official. I'm just thinking of JT in Shelley Moore Capito's office,
Yes.
who is a young staffer and who was just torn up that he was not able to meet Ben Vereen, who was, or was it Stokes? It was actually
It was
Stokes.
Stokes.
Who had been walking around with us for the Arts Advocacy Day in March. And he is someone who we really were able to connect with, somebody that is a young staffer that handles appropriations for the senator. And we were able to establish that rapport, and that was an entree. You know, I'm a Democrat. I was working on the Clinton campaign, but I walked in and brought that, pulled that meeting together with a Republican colleague of mine at the firm. And we were able to establish that, and we've continued that ongoing relationship. So when things like the economic impact study come out, we've established that relationship to the point where I can give him a call, or Nina can give him a call, and share that as a resource for him to share with his boss. So it's not just a one hit, this is what we're asking for and this is why, but rather this is why this is a relationship that we really should foster. And here are things that we have that can help you do your job. And we found out that he himself was a big advocate for the arts, and also that the senator herself was a big advocate of the performing arts, especially with a lot of the local theaters in West Virginia. So, exactly.
They really are the eyes and ears of those members. And if we treat them with respect, like they are someone who can do that, who are the eyes and ears of the member, they really rise to the occasion, making sure that our voices get heard through them to the member. Yes?
Your budget in 2016, 148 million for national endowments for the arts. And when I compared that, and I wondered if you have compared it, I read somewhere that one fighter jet was 160 million. Have you ever made those comparisons with the entire NEA budget compared to one military jet?
It is easy to make those comparisons, but the thing, yes, I can. In fact, I'll go ahead and keep doing that. Her question is, have you compared the total budget of the NEA to the price of one fighter jet? And essentially, is that an effective argument? And I would resist from doing that, because in this scenario where we're at, defense spending is crown king, and it is a argument that is not a winning argument in this period, because they are looking to increase defense spending, and we don't want to make it look like the arts are somehow getting in that way.
And I'll also just point to an article that I put on all of the tables that actually addresses that. And just yesterday, you saw pushback from Republicans that are pro-increase of spending that have been pushing back at the idea that that would require us to decrease domestic funding. And several members, Ken Calvert of California, who actually oversees and is the chairman of the Interior Subcommittee for Appropriations, pushed back against that idea, as well as Tom Cole, who's also a fairly high-ranking member of that subcommittee, both Republicans. And I don't want to say that it's because of our advocacy, but it is the conversations that we have with their offices that will allow them to have the ability to push against some of the things that might, in their mind, or at least in the political environment, seem popular, but give them that ammunition and allow them to sort of publicly get out in front, just like they did yesterday and the day before, to counter some of those arguments that folks will make.
Yes, another argument. Yes, ma'am.
I want to make a public thank you to KQED Arts. They covered in an article and a video the band concert that we did music from the 7 countries that were in the executive order.
Wow.
And they helped us promote it. We had 900
That's great.
Hey, that's all right.
Hey. That's a great
Let's do
example.
our part.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm representing the Cultural Council of Palm Beach County, Palm Beach, Florida, home of the Winter White House. So
God bless
Wow.
you.
I wanted to ask, you were talk a lot about the Congress and the Senate. Are you working at all with the First Lady? Just on 2 occasions that they were in Palm Beach, she visited 2 cultural arts organizations while she was there, and it's difficult because it's on one hand there's he wants to eliminate family, but on the other hand his wife is visiting cultural arts organizations while she's entertaining dignitaries. So I wonder if you're
Yeah.
thinking about that, if you're
I'll let you do. And just for the benefit of everyone, the question is, what is our engagement with First Lady, who is showing interest in the arts?
Sure. So it's actually an interesting dynamic because there is a bit of political, sort of internal political, I don't want to say, conflict, but they're trying to figure out who is actually going to take on this issue, whether it be the First Lady or whether it be Mrs. Pence. And Mrs. Pence has been very much an advocate of the arts and arts healing. And as you all probably saw, the First Lady just moved into the White House over the last week. So they're trying to figure out, okay, what is it that she's going to actually spearhead as her agenda, like the Let's Move, thing that Michelle Obama did. They're trying to determine what that is. So right now, the work that we're doing is determining, all right, where is that going to settle, and opening up lines of communications on both fronts. So with Karen Pence, we're working with her office, and the firm itself has relationships with her office and the Vice President's office, but then also have relationships with the First Lady and with Ivanka Trump. Julie Radford is her chief of staff, somebody that people within the firm have worked with in the past in her various capacities. So it's just a matter of determining what the best in is, and I also know that Americans for the Arts has also had inroads into the White House on that front, not specifically with the First Lady, but more broadly with the Office of Public Engagement.
And the first point of contact that I would say that we're trying to engage them on is the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. This is, it's not an agency, but it's a committee that was formed by presidential executive order during the Reagan administration. And it is historically been chaired by the First Lady of the United States. But at this moment, they have not expressed interest in even continuing it. But that doesn't mean it still can't happen. There was a lot of let's wait and see when the First Lady moves to Washington. So really, that is really our first serious level of engagement, because that's something that is going to just go lingering if nothing's done. And I think Karen Pence is kind of on deck to take that if the First Lady is not interested. Next question. Yes, back there. Yes, you.
I work for the Santa Fe Opera, and the opera world is very small, insulated, everyone knows each other. And we're often asked to work directly with Opera America, my national service organization, which is great. They've got a great advocacy guy, he helps me out a lot. I frequently even turn on to Americans for the Arts because this is what you do. I'm not saying I find you a better resource than Opera America. That's not what I'm saying, and I realize it's coming out that way. Do you guys talk to each other? Because I'll send out messaging to my constituents and advocates, and they're like, but wait, Performing Arts Alliance, Opera America, what's Americans for the Arts? Like, I don't know what to tell people in terms of the why.
Sure, I'm happy to answer that. So Americans for the Arts works very closely with all those organizations. There are a few different things that we do together. One is National Arts Advocacy Day. National Arts Advocacy Day is put on by Americans for the Arts, but we have close to 90 partners that are national arts service organizations, and Opera America has been part of that for probably 30 years, as long as it's been in existence. And to get to a unified platform position of what we want from Congress, there are a series of weekly meetings leading up to Arts Advocacy Day for us to all get on that same position as a policy point. Then once Arts Advocacy Day it happens, where we're all up on Capitol Hill, arm in arm, doing our thing, we don't let that work end there. And that's where the Cultural Advocacy Group comes into play, and that is our coalition of national arts service organizations that continues to meet on a weekly basis. Narek Rome, do you want to raise your hand? He's our Vice President of Government Affairs and Americans for the Arts that interacts with the Opera Americas and American Symphony Orchestra League, and the list goes on, Theater Communications Group, on a weekly basis, so that we do lobbying visits together. We get on the same, how much are we going to ask for the NEA, so we have it at the same point. Where you're seeing the difference is they have a small staff, and so they don't have the ability to, it's essentially a half person. They spend half the time at Opera America and the other with Dance USA, who is your advocate, who is fantastic. But they don't have the magnitude of staff. We have close to 10 that are working on a political front that's working on a grassroots front. We do federal affairs, we do state affairs, we do local government affairs. We're across the board, and we want to engage those service groups so that we're all on the same page, but we can just kind of go broader and deeper and faster on advocacy issues. Yes. Yes, madam in the red.
I live in Oakland, and I sign every single petition I can in support of the arts.
Yay.
But I am a Democrat, everybody knows Democrat, everybody who's on the city, the county, the state, and the federal level supports the arts. Is there, to your, the lobbyists, is there anything I can do with the Republican leadership? I'm not their constituent. I understand I can't call some other elected officials if they don't care about me. I can call my other representatives and they all tell me they agree with me. Is there anything I can do to help influence the federal level?
I just want to say one thing, and then I'll send it over to anyone else who might want to say something. So in these situations, I always tell them to use your Democratic representative to be your lobbyist to lobby the other members of
Yeah.
Congress.
That's right.
And that's very, very effective, peer-to-peer advocacy and coalition work there with either the Congressional Arts Caucus or any other kind of direct. And I'll give you a great example. If you look at this list of who got money and who didn't get money, let's see, do I have it? Yeah, look, it got cut off a little bit, but the John F. Kennedy Center is on the very bottom. And you can see it's half cut off, but the number there is $36.7 million was recommended by the president. And why is that? Here's the background. You can't get a more Democratic person than Congressman Joseph Kennedy, who happened to be personal friends with Mick Mulvaney, who is now the director of OMB, but the former congressman, very conservative Tea Partier from South Carolina. They were gym mates, and their lockers were right next to each other in the congressional gym. And it's Joe Kennedy who went and had a meeting with Mick Mulvaney before they put out the budget numbers that convinced him why it's important to fund the Kennedy Center. And that's why that's the only increase that the president gave to an agency.
Can I also? I would also say that I think this is the moment where showing up at hearings and committees is going to be the best voice, right? So though your representatives are there, but like the joint committee that just happened up in Sacramento around the arts, that also had the bills around safe and affordable housing for artists. We knew the Otis report, we knew the economic, but it was really important to have all the other legislators on the committee hear from the group and hear all those same reasons, and so that you could have your representative be the advocate to their colleagues.
And I'll echo that on the federal level. I mean, working with your representatives in Washington on Capitol Hill, providing them with the ammunition that they need when they're going into these meetings, whether it be markups, whether it be hearings, whether it be conversations on appropriations. They can then come with those to those because, right now, yes, the Republicans are in power on the House side and in the Senate side, but there are still members, obviously, there are still Democrats, especially on the Senate side, that have to be listened to in order to get a lot of these pieces of legislation and a lot of these things done.
I like that idea. Do you have one thing that you can point to on the Americans for the Arts website that I can print out, take it to Barbara Lee's office and say, take this back?
Yep.
What are other things that I should be taking to?
Oh,
Like a printed item that I can take to.
I would say the NEA issue brief. That is on the Americans for the Arts Mobilization Center. And I would take that issue brief because it has the best talking points and it has the ask that we're looking for and all the latest research stats on why it's important. And what you're asking her to do is, it's not only just lobbying other members. Another important thing to know here is Paul Ryan has a problem in that his Republican caucus is not a unified caucus.
Right.
The Freedom Caucus is constantly splintering off, and he actually needs Democrats to vote on bills. That's why you had a very good, beneficial omnibus bill for FY 2017, because all the Democrats voted for it, and it gave him enough to pass it, whereas all the Freedom Caucus members didn't vote for it.
The other thing is that I think materials out is good, but I just had a conversation with Senator Allen, and he brought a Republican colleague to a juvenile detention center so that colleague could then have a first-person experience that they brought back when they were in committee. And so I think the paper is good, and you need to have them. But I think the way this room, we provide experiences that are the first-person experiences that help them make good decisions. And we have to keep inviting them to participate in our good work. That is your job, actually.
Yeah. It's such a good question. I keep on thinking of more reasons. But because, I mean, I get this question a lot, you know, I have a fully democratic delegation, what am I supposed to do? It's not worth still meeting with them. It's still not worth sending something, but it is, because you're giving them the latest updates on what's going on in your community for the arts. You're giving them the latest impact, and then they become more passionate advocates for us.
That's right.
They cannot let this go by the wayside. Yes, sir.
You provide a lot of information to us to help us be stronger advocates. Is there a resource through your website, or do you need those stories?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a template that we can follow with, you know, a certain number of words, a certain resonance to a
That's
story,
great.
but to
Yeah,
share
that's
with
good.
you the impact
Mhm.
of the programs and services that we provide
Yeah,
to
so,
help you do your job?
right, so the question is, do we have essentially a form on our website to collect local stories? We don't have that. What we have been doing is where we have a, between David and I, we have a targeted list of members that we are targeting full on. And what we end up doing is contacting those local arts agencies in those areas and say, tell us your stories. Or we base it on the NEA grants that have gone to those congressional districts, and we call those organizations and we say, give us your stories. But it's not a general call, but that doesn't necessarily mean we shouldn't have it. So it's
Yeah,
a
I
good
think
idea.
That's a great idea.
having that kind of a, you know, I don't want a library of stories that we can go to when we are actually targeting, and oftentimes that target list changes, and especially with the way you know, the political environment is now, it can change on a dime. So it might not necessarily be, you know, conducive for us to be able to collect those stories versus being able to go and see, okay, you know, John in Cincinnati has this great story about something that really impacted his daughter because of this particular program, and she was really struggling, and this got her to, you know, really start to focus and get uplifted. And, you know, then it turns out we need to target and meet with somebody in that particular congressional district. I think that, you know, makes our jobs that much easier.
Yeah. So I want to get you off to your next session. You have about 5 minutes. So thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Please welcome, thank us.